So I think it's important to shine the spotlight on young black males because historically and even contemporarily, so much has been written, said, researched about black males that has deficit context associated with them. So they can't read as well as their counterparts, they can't write as well, they fall behind academically, they're behaviorally challenged. So part of the issue is if we begin to shed attention on this population, on the one hand, we begin to talk about some of the real deep-seated issues that are affecting black males in schools. But I think it's important to also shift the paradigm a little bit and to make it clear that not all black males are failing in schools, not all of them are dropping out, not all of them are behavioral problems. So it's really about trying to change the paradigm so that it is a much more balanced and comprehensive way in which we see black males. That's not to dispute the fact that there are some real deep-seated problems that black males encounter in schools. There's a lot of disproportionality around special education placement, as you well know. A lot of suspensions and expulsions that tend to happen in higher numbers than any other group. So that's a definite problem that needs to be addressed. But part of this is that we also have young black males who are achieving just as well as any other group of students. So for me, when I think about what we define as success, I think it can be multifaceted. On the one hand, I do think we can use traditional measures such as graduation rates, reading, writing, math proficiency scores. Those things matter, and I think we should always be trying to find ways to help young black males reach proficiency in the traditional indicators. But part of the challenge is I think that success can also be defined in some other ways that typically are not part of that equation. For example, I think for many young males there's lots of leadership skills that are exhibited in ways that oftentimes aren't evaluated or aren't captured. I think young black males oftentimes play mentoring roles for younger siblings, younger cousins, things of that nature, and for peers as well. That's not captured. So success is how do you ultimately sort of situate yourself in a classroom, in a school, and participate in a way that you are an active contributor to what is happening in the learning process. You may not be the A student, but you still can be someone who is making a worthwhile contribution to the learning process, and I think that can be success as well. We also have to recognize that a number of young black males do successful things outside the context of the classroom. They help in their homes, they help in their communities. So I think part of what we have to do is as we define success, as we define the ways in which young black males participate, we can't be so narrow in our notions of what that success that we don't allow them to be recognized in areas outside of traditional grade mechanisms. The commonly held belief is that black males are more troublesome in schools. They cause more behavioral, or they have more behavioral problems. They don't tend to pay attention as much. They tend to be more disruptive in classrooms. They tend to be combative. We've got this notion here in the state of California that we've looked at some data that shows that African American males are the most likely group to be referred for special education because of what they call willful defiance. So there's this idea that black males, more than any other group of students, are openly defiant and don't respect authority and things of that sort. So these are some of the ways in which black males, more so than any other group of students, get classified and characterized. And the problem becomes is that for young black males to hear this message over and over again about what they cannot do, what they are unable to do, how much of a problem they are, why they cannot succeed, why they will not succeed. You hear that over and over again. At some point in time, it becomes self-fulfilling prophecy, where they start to believe this is how I'm supposed to act out. This is what they think about me. This is what they say about me. So some of the commonly held beliefs is that these are students who don't want to learn. These are students who cannot learn. You can't challenge them academically. The reason why they're not in AP classes or honors classes at the same rates as some of their peers is because they don't challenge themselves or they don't have the necessary requisite content knowledge to be able to be successful. So it all operates from this deficit paradigm that still centers on the belief that they are lacking in some way, shape, or form. And therefore, because they're lacking, we want to somehow keep them away from those kids who are attempting to succeed. So if we can place them all in special education classes, no one seems to be bothered by that because that means they're out of the hair or out of the way of the folks who are doing the real teaching and learning. So there are a lot of problematic notions of who black males are. And so part of what we have to do is find examples and show models where black males are in classrooms and they're doing just as fine, if not better, than some of their peers who are not black and who are not male. Once we begin to help educators see those models, then hopefully you begin to turn the tide a little bit to have them recognize that black male success is not an aberration. It happens in lots of places and it happens with consistency, and part of what we want to do is find ways to replicate it. So this is one of the big problems we have around how how black males see themselves. Because I think we have some really rigid notions of masculinity in the black community, of which black males observe and internalize some of those notions. So some of these ideas around this narrow notion of masculinity is that black males have to be strong, they have to be tough, they have to be hard, you can't show emotion, you can't have a sensitive side. These are things that I think are really problematic, because it kind of puts black males in these really narrow notions of how they're supposed to perform who they are. And I think that's a problem, because what happens is that in the context of schools, young black males enter into classrooms, and what happens is that their ways of knowing and their ways of being oftentimes are not consistent with the ways in which classrooms are structured, right? So one of the things that happens is that you may have a classroom teacher who wants students to elaborate on how they may have understood a text, for example. Talk about all the nuances of what you've just read. Talk about how it made you feel when you read that particular response, right? So for a young man who has this very rigid notion of masculinity, you don't talk about how you feel, right? You don't talk about what it meant to you in terms of your emotional kinds of compass. You just kind of talk about what you're thinking about here. So I think for many young black males, consciously and unconsciously, these ideas around this is how I'm supposed to act. If someone says something about me, though I know it's wrong for me to be disruptive in class, I'm going to say something back, because this is the way we perform our masculinity, right? If someone says that they're going to do something to me, I can't back down and make it appear as though I'm not going to be able to defend myself. So I've got to sort of one up him. So there's this back and forth process that a lot of young males operate from, that says that I have to be the one who talks louder, I got to be the one who seems to be harder, I've got to be the one who shows that I don't care as much, I don't have emotion, I don't have affect. So therefore, if I can do that, the more in tune I am with my masculinity. I think we've got to help all of our young men understand that there are diverse notions of masculinity, and there's a continuum of masculinity. I think that you can have individuals who are just as masculine, who are in touch with their emotions, who are able to express themselves, who have feelings and they're willing to share those feelings. But we tend to look at that as being soft or sensitive. And I think those are real problems. I think we can talk about masculinity that recognizes the full spectrum of the human condition. I mean, it's only human to feel sad. It's only human to feel joy. It's only human to want to be connected to someone personally and emotionally. And those are the ways in which we have to help our young people feel more in touch with their humanness. But because we have these real distorted notions of masculinity, many of our young men operate on some very troublesome ways of how they're supposed to perform their notions of what it means to be male. And then I think when you add another layer on top of that of what it means to be black and male, I think those notions of masculinity become even more narrowly defined, which I think is a huge problem. Our work is really multifaceted. We do different types of work associated and involved with young black males, from kindergarten all the way to post-secondary education. So we have a number of projects going on, and part of our purpose is to help raise awareness around some of the issues involving black males, but then to also try to identify best practices, programs, and policies that might be useful in advocating for better school experiences and life chances for young black males. So just to give you a snapshot of some of our work that we've done, we completed a 2-year study looking at single-sex classrooms for black males, and we wanted to see if single-sex classrooms, as they're currently constructed in Los Angeles County, really have an impact on academic outcomes for young black males. Those findings were a little bit mixed. We found that some of those classrooms did have some really good ways of structuring teaching that had better effects for learning for young black males. Some of them not so well, but again, it was important to at least test the theory that somehow suggests that young black males learning in single-sex schools will do better. We currently have a project now with the California Community Foundation where we're looking at young black males between the ages of 14 and 18 who are among some of the highest offenders in Los Angeles County. And our goal is to see how we can reduce the recidivism rates and find ways to engage these young men back in school, back in communities, and back into their homes. Because what we're finding is that once these young men offend, the likelihood that they'll re-enter back into schools or re-enter back into their communities in a progressive way is severely limited. So we're working with several community-based organizations to help reduce recidivism across the county. And we also work here with the Los Angeles County Office of Education around their work with freedom schools. There we're talking about looking at literacy for young African-American males as young as ages 6, 7, 8 years old, because what we know is this, is that if students have high degrees of success when it comes to reading, they have a much higher likelihood that they'll graduate from high school. If we can intervene early and help these young boys develop core literacy skills, they have a much better chance of being successful. So this year we'll be in our second year working with the Freedom Schools around issues of literacy in young black males. And then finally, we also have a project here that's at UCLA that looks at black male retention. UCLA does a phenomenal job graduating students across the board, has one of the highest graduation rates in the country. Something like 90% of students who start UCLA finish. But when you peel back the layers and start to look at the numbers across specific subgroups, what we see is that African American males in particular graduate at a rate of about 62-63%, much lower than the university rate. Now, consider that it is higher than what we see for black males at other institutions, but we like to see that number be higher. So what we've done is developed an intervention course for young black males who are in their first years here at UCLA, and the entire goal is to get them to connect to the different resources that are here on the campus, to get them acclimated to a community, to know where they can get help with tutoring, to know where they can get assistance when it comes to issues around financial aid. And the whole purpose of that program is to increase the persistence rates of black males here at UCLA. So we deal with them as early as first, second grade, and then on the opposite end of the spectrum for those who are here at UCLA in undergraduate education. We have to understand that when you're talking about young black males, and I would really broaden that to say young males of color, in particular black and brown males, Southeast Asian males I include in that categorization, is to understand that that's a population that is desperately in need of our embracing, desperately in need of us advocating on their behalf. Part of what we have not come to grips with is that we are incarcerating far too many of these young men. And if we took some of the resources, some of the time and effort that is spent on incarcerating them, and we use that to educate them, not only is there a financial benefit that our communities would be able to receive, but also it would mean something from just a community strength and a family strength standpoint if these young men were able to be contributing members of their families and of society. So I would say we've got to not buy into the rhetoric around these young men being problematic. Most of these young men do not commit crimes. Most of them do not harm people. Most of them want to be contributing members of society. It's up to us to embrace them and to help them find the pathways that they want to explore to become self-fulfilling members of our society. So I think we've got to sort of get rid of the rhetoric and be willing to have some hard conversations about where it comes from and why we have such negative notions and stereotypes about certain young men, and to recognize that these young men are just as in need of love and concern and care as anyone else. And then, for many of us, I always say this, we are hard pressed to find any of us who don't have brothers or nephews or uncles or cousins who find themselves being placed in these categories unfairly. So we have to remember that these individuals who mean a lot to us and who are near and dear to our hearts, we've got to advocate not only for them, but for individuals like them across the country and across the world, really, because what you see in other parts of the world is that this same depiction of black males as being threatening, hostile, aggressive, confrontational, I believe oftentimes is very far from the truth.